In France there are different institutions with collective names. He's teaching at the engineering school in Grenoble, which is one of the best schools in France. What is important is the fact that Professor Dahl is an engineer who likes rational approach to engineering problems and to science. I will not talk about the list of publications, and he's president of many things. We don't mind about all this in the sense that it is useless to list all of them, but I must tell something which is for me very important. Professor Dahl is one of the members of the renewed editorial board of the well-known and famous Compte Rendu de l'Académie des Sciences de Paris. And in this job, I think he is called to give new strength to the French research. He will talk about a very important and mathematically inspired subject. I leave him to teach us what he decided in these lectures, and I ask you, all of you, at the end of the first part of the lecture, to raise questions, to ask questions, to discuss openly, because we are here for understanding. Okay? So we must understand. So if you don't manage to understand, ask questions. I know that there are here some persons who are not aware. Now, I ask Professor Dahl to start.
Thank you, Francesco, for this introduction. Good afternoon to everybody. That's a pleasure for me to be here with you and to have some exchanges and discussions. As Francesco told you, do not hesitate to interrupt me at any time and to ask questions at any time, not only at the end of the lectures, but if a point is not clear, that's not at all a problem for me to be stopped, and we will discuss peacefully. The main topic of these lectures concern my favorite topic presently, which is failure, and particularly failure in non-associate materials. I will define properly non-associate materials. As Francesco told you, it appears that many elastoplastic materials are indeed non-associate, like porous material, biomaterials, and so on. This question of failure is, of course, of primary importance for engineers. Of course, often the most important question for an engineer is to be able to not have failures, ruptures, instabilities in the buildings or the engineering works is constructing. This question of failure was, of course, has been, of course, treated something like 1 century ago by people like von Mises, Tresca, and so on. This question of failure was revisited after the Second World War, particularly in relation with the development of all these numerical methods and the development of the power of computers. But these developments have been obtained by assuming that the materials are associated. And it appears that many materials are non-associated, and second, the failure is completely different for non-associated materials. Just go walking in your mountain here, and you will see in nature that many different kinds of failure appear. You have landslides, you have fractured cliffs, you have geometric instabilities, you have liquefaction for sands, you have compaction bands, you have shear bands, and so on. All these various modes of failure which are observed indeed in the nature, all these various modes of failure can be analyzed and explained only by considering that geomaterials, for example, as non-associated materials, can be explained only by taking into account the fact that geomaterials are non-associated materials. I will try to discuss with you about this question of failure in non-associated materials by considering successively three different points of view, three different approaches. The first one is the most classical. It's by using phenomenological elastoplastic constitutive relations. And I will, by discussing with Angela and Giuseppe, I understood that you are not so aware here about elastoplasticity, constitutive relation, and I will make some developments in the blackboard to come back about this notion of, which is basic from an engineering point of view particularly, this question of constitutive relation and this question of elastoplasticity. My first approach will be precisely to use phenomenological elastoplastic relation. Then the second part, point 4 in the slide, will be to consider a micro-mechanical model for granular materials. Micromechanics is quite a new tool today, but I am sure that in the future micromechanics will be more and more important, particularly for porous materials, in order to base macroscopic analysis, macroscopic constitutive relation on the true structure of the material. And micromechanics is able to propose macroscopic model based on the microstructure. I will take into account the example of granular materials, but I think that this question of micromechanics is more important than only in relation with granular materials. And the approach will be to consider a discrete element method, point 5 on the slide. Discrete element method is also a little bit a new tool in the application to granular material. But numerical discrete model is just an application to granular materials of probably the most powerful method in modern physics, which is molecular dynamics. Probably many of you have seen this word molecular dynamics, which is more or less popular. Molecular dynamics is used today to model the universe, to model fluids, to model metals, and so on. And the basic idea of molecular dynamics, which is not so intuitive as an idea, the basic idea is to consider that the complexity of the nature, the complexity of the real world, is not due to the complexity of the laws, of the interaction laws between particles, atoms, molecules, stars for the universe, but it is due to the great number, to the very high number, very large number of elements in interaction. And the complexity, now that's more or less, it was the basic idea of molecular dynamics 30 years ago, but today that's more or less a classical idea, because this idea has been verified for very different questions, like the formation of galaxies in the universe, the flow of some liquids, the behavior of metals, and so on. The idea is that you can consider very simple laws between elements, and you will obtain the extreme complexity which is visible just by considering a great number of elements in interactions. And this idea of molecular dynamics is extremely fruitful for granular materials, because with one mechanical parameter, which is the friction between two grains and even between two spheres, just with one mechanical parameter, the friction angle, as defined by Leonardo da Vinci. Leonardo da Vinci has you know this experiments of Leonardo da Vinci? Leonardo da Vinci make this experiment very nice. You have a table here, something like that. And you measure the force necessary for these boxes, these pellets to slide. So you measure the force with this kind of experiment. And now you put the three boxes, the three pellets, like that. And you measure the new force. According to you, the force is the same or what? The answer is not so obvious, huh? It is the same. It is the same, and it was with this kind of experiments that Leonardo da Vinci has proven that the friction coefficient exist, because here you have T equal to 3 Fn, if n is the weight of each pallet, and of course here you have T equal to F multiplied by 3n. Of course, that's the same force. It's clear today. But it proves that F depends only on both the material, and F does not depend on the area. Not so obvious, the existence of a friction angle. Okay, it was just a small story, but I tell you the story because friction coefficient has been proposed by Leonardo da Vinci. Okay, with just this dry friction coefficient between two spheres, if you consider 10,000 of spheres, you will obtain with this discrete element method, this numerical method, with only one mechanical parameter, but with a great number of spheres, you will obtain numerically all the complexity of the behavior of a sand. And the behavior of a sand is really complicated, for example, with respect to a metal. You have a dilatant behavior, you have a non-associated behavior, you have a large hardening behavior before failure, large strains before failure. You have this question of shear band formation, plastic strain localization, and so on. Very complex behavior. This very complex behavior can be obtained with a very extremely simple constitutive laws between two spheres, just Leonardo da Vinci interaction law. But the main ingredient is, of course, this great number of spheres in interaction. The point 5 will be devoted to the application of discrete models to this question of failure. And here also, certainly in your professional career, you will use not only more or less classical finite element method, but probably you will use this discrete element method or another method deduced from molecular dynamics. Okay, is this outline okay for you? Okay, let's go. All these results have been obtained by some French colleagues here. François Nicot in Simagreb, Farid Lawafai in INRIS, Ali Dawadji in the University of Metz, Luc Sibyl in the University of Nantes, Florent Prunier in INSA de Lyon, and by some PhD students working presently in Grenoble with me. This research has been supported by some European network like ALERT and SafeLand, and also by a French national research project. Okay, let's go for the first slide, classical view of failure. But before, I will introduce these first equations of elastoplasticity by coming back to constitutive relations. A constitutive relation is a difficult question because everybody knows that if we apply a force to a material, if you apply some stresses to a material, some strains are induced. And clearly, there are some links between stresses and strains, according to the experiment. But now, just go to the beach. Here, there are not so many tourists presently. The beach is perfectly flat. On the surface of the beach, no strains, no stresses, perfectly flat. You walk on the beach and you look behind you. Behind you, you will see some imprints on the beach. Behind you, again, the stresses are equal to 0. But you have some strains. It means that for the same value of stresses, 0, you can have any value of the strains. And there is a kind of paradox. Stresses and strains are linked, but for a given value of stress, you can have any value of the strains. Huh? A kind of paradox, a kind of contradiction. What is a solution? Probably someone can give me an idea. The answer is that stresses and strains are not linked as variables, but are linked to some paths. It means that if I consider now a given loading path as my foot on the beach, if I know all the history of my foot on the beach, of course, the history of the strains is determined and unique. It means that you have a relation between loading paths and response paths, and not between one value of stress and one value of strain. We can define in a rigorous manner this question of loading paths and this question of response paths. Both variables, the loading variables and the response variable, must be linked, must be conjugate variables with respect to the energy. You cannot choose any stress or strain components as loading variables or response variables. But I will not enter into these important but technical points. You see here that you have a relation between one function and another function. Not one variable and another variable, but one function and another function. And in mathematics, the operator which links one function to another function is called functional. It means that the link here is given by what is called the constitutive functional of the material. It means that you will have something like F is the linear transformation associated to the deformation of the material. You know that F can be decomposed into rotation, characterized by an orthogonal matrix, and one deformation, pure deformation, characterized by a symmetric matrix. And according to the objectivity principle, it's possible to show that F can be studied only as a function of the deformation D, with respect to the objectivity principle. Okay, now you have to consider a functional to describe visco-elastoplastic behavior. And it is not so easy to manipulate in mathematics a functional. But it appears in, I think it was in 58, some mathematician, Owen and Williams, have demonstrated from a mathematical point of view that this functional, as soon as you have plastic strains, this functional is singular. For rate-independent materials, if you assume that F is differentiable, you cannot describe any internal dissipation. It means that you are able to describe only an elastic, reversible behavior if you assume that F is regular. This question is very simple. I will not enter into this demonstration. This demonstration is one of the most important demonstration in constitutive theory. I will not enter into this demonstration, but I will just consider this example in a one-dimensional case, a very simple case. Sigma is a scalar, epsilon is a scalar, and you have an elastoplastic behavior like that. And at this point M, at this strain state M, I will consider the loading and an unloading. And you see that I will be able to define a modulus here for the loading and another modulus here, tangent modulus, for the unloading. And now, from a mathematical point of view, you see that it means that the derivative on the right is different from the derivative on the left. As soon as you have plastic strains, the modulus for loading is different, largely different. It's not 10%, it's 4, 5, 10 times different from the modulus for unloading. It means that this, the functional, which is linking sigma to epsilon, has to be non-differentiable at any point, at any stress strain state where you have some plastic strains. Okay, it means that if you want to describe plastic strain, generally speaking, a viscoelastoplastic behavior, you have to consider a functional, not only a functional, but a singular functional. Okay, no solution. From a mathematical point of view, no solution. It was more or less the end of the classical theory of rheology. The functional is today used only in linear viscoelasticity. In linear viscoelasticity, the constitutive functional is an integral. That's the only case where today we are using functional. And indeed, in all the numerical codes you will use in your professional career with a finite element method or with another numerical method, the constitutive relation is not written with such a constitutive functional, but with another way to express constitutive relation. And today, in practice, all the constitutive relations are expressed by this other way to consider constitutive relation, which is called the incremental expression of constitutive relation. Just a few words about this way. As usually in physics, the basis comes from a principle of determinism. The fact that to a given loading path, you can associate a unique response path constitutes what is called principle of determinism in the large. If you consider a sample, if you apply a given loading path to this sample, the response path is determined and unique. This is principle of determinism in the large. The other way to express constitutive relation is based to a principle of determinism in the small. According to this principle, it means according to the experiments, if you consider a sample, a specimen of a material, if you apply a small loading during dt, the small response is determined and unique. It means that according to this principle, you have a given function which relates d epsilon, d sigma, and dt. In this expression, of course, you have to define properly d epsilon and d sigma, to define in an objective way d epsilon and d sigma by considering the strain rate here multiplied by dt and by considering here an objective derivative of the stress tensor, for example, the Yeoman derivative of the stress tensor. I will not enter into this, these technical details. Of course, this function f, which relates d epsilon, d sigma, and dt, will depend on the previous history of the previous loading history of the material, of the sample. If I consider c'est pas assez mou ça. Ah, no. This one will be perfect. Yeah. Of course, F is describing the current incremental behavior of the material. And of course, the incremental behavior in this position here is very different from incremental behavior now. Huh? The function F has to depend on the previous history, mechanical history, loading history of the sample. But here, F is a true function. Here we have a functional, but now we have a true function. But now we are obliged to integrate, to obtain the response paths, we have to integrate F along the loading paths. Huh? Here we have directly the response path. Now we have to integrate the incremental mechanical behavior of your material along the loading paths to obtain the response paths. And now I will consider only a rate-independent material. It means elastoplastic material. For this material, the behavior is invariant with respect to the rates. Coming back again to the beach, if you apply your foot on the beach slowly or faster, the imprint will be exactly the same. If you are running, you have inertial effect, dynamical effect. But if you stay inside static conditions, if you apply slowly or faster your foot, your imprint will depend only on your weight, but not on the rate of the application of your weight. It means that these materials are rate independent, their behavior is invariant with respect to the rates. These materials have not at all any viscous strain, only elastoplastic strains. If so, and coming back to the principle of determinism, if so, the small response will be independent, invariant, with respect to the time increment dt during which the small loading has been applied. It means that for rate-independent materials, we can consider d epsilon as a function of d sigma, or d sigma as a function of d epsilon. Because the behavior is rate independent. If you apply, for example, d epsilon during dt or during 4 times dt, d sigma is the same. It means that F for rate independent materials is independent from dt, and you can consider for elastoplastic behavior d epsilon as a function of d sigma, or d sigma as a function of d epsilon. And okay, I have called this function f on the slide. But now you have another property which is very interesting, which constitutes the basis of elastoplasticity, which is the fact that, again, you can apply to these relations the fact that G or G minus 1 is invariant. It means d epsilon and d sigma are rates. It means that if you multiply d epsilon by the positive scalar lambda and d sigma by the positive scalar lambda, nothing should change. G is invariant with respect to the rates. If I multiply both the rates by a given positive scalar, nothing will change. It means that you have this relation. This relation implies that G is an homogeneous function of degree 1. And this is the definition of an homogeneous function. A function is homogeneous if for any value of lambda you have this identity. Homogeneous of order n. Here it's homogeneous of order 1. This result is very interesting because it means that if you want to describe a rate-independent behavior, an elastoplastic behavior, you have to consider only homogeneous function of degree 1. It's very important for a modeler, for someone who wants to build elastoplastic relations. It's very important. He has to consider only homogeneous functions of degree 1, and according to, now I can come back to the slide. According to Euler's identity for homogeneous function, Euler's identity for homogeneous function is like that. Maybe you remember that. This is an identity with respect to x and y. For homogeneous function of degree 1, you have this identity, which is a very powerful tool, because just consider an homogeneous function of degree 1 like that. This is an homogeneous function of degree 1, I think so. Lambda 2, lambda 1. Okay. Now just consider the partial derivatives of f with respect to x and with respect to y. That's more or less complicated expression. That's for your next night if you are not able to sleep. And just multiply the first derivative by x, the second derivative by 1, add, and you will come back to the original expression of the function. That's quite a powerful tool. And now, if we apply this tool to the elastoplastic function f, we have this identity here, and here you have the gradient of a matrix, or the gradient of vector with 6 components if I consider the 6-dimensional spaces. Maybe I have to recall you this this classical definition of the vectorial notation for sigma and epsilon. You replace the stress tensor by this six-dimensional vector same thing with epsilon. The square root of 2 are here in order to have the same value of energy in the physical three-dimensional space and here in this mathematical, virtual, six-dimensional space. Okay, if you are using this notation, M will be here a matrix. If not, this is a tensor of rank 4. But now we are using, particularly in the numerical, in the books of numerical methods, this notation is extremely often used. Okay, it means that here you have the gradient of a vector. It means this is a matrix. This is the famous, the well-known elastoplastic matrix. You see that it is possible to demonstrate the existence of this elastoplastic matrix. This is not an assumption. The existence of this elastoplastic matrix here comes just from the property of homogeneity and Euler's identity. And another point is very interesting, and I will come back on this point later on. A point is very interesting is the fact that the derivatives of an homogeneous function of degree 1 are also homogeneous function of degree 0. It means that here all the components of the elastoplastic matrix are homogeneous function of degree 0. And you have here the second main feature of elastoplastic relation, which is the fact that the elastoplastic tensor depends on state variables, hardening parameters, history parameters, and so on, as we have seen. M has to vary as a function of the previous stress-strain history, but the other important property is the fact that M, the elastoplastic matrix, with respect to d epsilon, is only a function of the direction of d epsilon. Or if I consider d epsilon as a function of d sigma, the tensor n will depend only on the direction of d sigma. Here you have the canonical expression of all elastoplastic relations. All elastoplastic relations can be put under this canonical form here, and probably you have in mind that in the simplest elastoplastic relations you have two different values for M, the elastic value and the elastoplastic value. It means that M has to depend, even for the simplest elastoplastic constitutive relation, M has to depend to the current direction of loading. And this kind of relation where we consider a given set of directions for d epsilon, this kind of relation is called incrementally linear. And in the general case, this kind of relation is called incrementally non-linear because the relation between d sigma and d epsilon is non-linear, which is, of course, difficult to understand. But if the relation is linear between d sigma and d epsilon, it means that the constitutive functional is, of course, regular, because you have been able to differentiate it. The fact that the relation between d sigma and d epsilon is non-linear is directly linked to the fact that the constitutive functional I have introduced at the beginning of this lecture is singular. You have not any linear relation between d sigma and d epsilon. Okay, now you have here the general expression of all elastoplastic relation, and you want to describe failure. What means failure? Failure, in the most simplest experiment, failure is just the fact that this is the experiment of Leonardo da Vinci. You push the box, nothing happens, then suddenly it slides, and it slides indefinitely. Not completely indefinitely, because you dissipate energy. And if you push your heavy luggage on the soil, you will be tired quite rapidly, because you need to give some energy. But finally, what means failure? It means the possibility to have finite strains for a constant applied stress. Failure, in classical views, are linked to the existence of some limit stress states. The material cannot sustain any stress value above a given limit value. I push here and I am not able to increase the force indefinitely. There is a given value, a limit value of the force which can be applied. And if so, if I want to describe failure for elastoplastic material, and according to the experiments, all elastoplastic materials have this kind of behavior, some limits of applied forces or stresses or displacement. If so, you see that if I want to describe this vanishing stress here and to obtain not zero value for d epsilon, necessarily the determinant of M has to be equal to 0, and I have this additional condition here. You have here the two main basic equations of failure in any plastic theory. This is very general. This is true for any failure theory in plasticity. This condition here, M is a function of the strain history, is a function of as a first expression, as a first approximation, M is a function of the stress state. It means that this equation here corresponds to a limit surface in the stress space. Generally speaking, in the 6-dimensional stress space, you have a limit surface which is called the plastic limit condition. But you have always a second ingredient in plastic failure, which is called in elastoplastic theory the plastic flow rule, which is given here. Because the determinant of M is vanishing, this equation will give you non-zero value for d epsilon, but will give you an infinite number of solutions which have the same direction. If d epsilon is solution, lambda d epsilon is also solution. It means that this equation will give you only the direction of d epsilon at failure. And the second equation is called in elastoplastic theory plastic flow rule. You know, once more, this is a pleasure to cite Leonardo da Vinci. Once more, this is just this basic experiment. If I push the value of the displacement is not known. If I have enough energy to give to the box, the displacement will be as large as I want. It means that at failure, the constitutive relation cannot give you the value of the strain, but the direction is perfectly known. And the flow rule gives you the direction of the strain rate of failure, the direction of the flow. And you see that if I change the direction of the force, I will change the direction of the flow. It means that d epsilon will depend, can depend on the direction of the applied force. In the general case of incremental nonlinear relation, in advanced elastoplastic theories, M will depend on the direction of d epsilon. It means that this equation is not completely linear, and you will have what is called in elastoplastic theories vertex effects. And for example, for incrementally piecewise linear elastoplastic relations, incrementally piecewise linear, this vertex here is just a pyramid. You have several linear relations according to the direction of d epsilon, and it means that this singularity is just a pyramid. Okay, the purpose of this lecture now is just to show you that this theory is not at all valid for non-associate material, and of course I will define this word non-associate. It means that this theory is not valid for geomaterials, for porous materials, for a lot of material in the real world, in nature, and also in our body. Before to consider this question from a theoretical point of view, then from a numerical point of view, I will have to show you some experimental results showing clear failure which are not described by this kind of relation. Before to enter into some theories or some numerical consideration, we have to base our ideas on experiments. And in order to be as rational as possible, I will first show you some experimental results. These experimental results have been obtained for soils. It means that these experimental results are a part of what is called geomechanics. I know that there are few people in this room working in geomechanics. More or less that will be the unique part in these lectures really linked to geomechanics. The other part can be applied, generally speaking, to all non-associate elastoplastic materials. It means that we can have now some question about this general introduction about constitutive relation and elastoplasticity. You can have a small break of 5 minutes or what?
Maybe you can go ahead with your experiments.
Okay. You are sure that you have not question about this very short introduction both to constitutive relation and to the basis of elastoplasticity? Anyway, you will have to tell me if you want that I can establish, for example, tomorrow morning, I can establish the general expression of non-associate elastoplastic constitutive relation. Maybe that could be interesting. And not to enter into technical details, but to establish. I have not some notes with me, but probably I am able to establish this expression. I hope so, without my notes. If you have any question, even some naive question, you know the naive questions are the most difficult to answer for the teachers.
Maybe it's a naive question, but I'm going to follow why if F does not depend on the T, then the function G must be homogeneous. I've lost this.
That's a good question. I have using two times the fact that I am considering rate-independent materials. First, the first consequence is that the function f has not to be a function of dt. For rate-independent materials, from a philosophical point of view, rate-independent materials doesn't know the physical time. Physical time doesn't exist. Just the chronology of events. It means that for example, a dinosaurus on the beach will have the same imprint of his big legs 100 millions of years ago or yesterday. The time doesn't exist. And we are able to find today, indeed, the imprints of dinosaurs 100 millions of years ago. It means that physical time doesn't exist. From this is not really an assumption. This is a consequence of the existence of such rate-independent materials. The first consequence is the fact that I can consider d epsilon as a function of d sigma and d sigma as a function of d epsilon. And now, on this new expression of elastoplastic constitutive relation, on this new expression, I apply once more the fact that the material is rate independent. It means that this new function G has to be invariant with respect to rates. For the same basic point, rate independency, invariance with respect to rates, I exhibit two consequences. First, dt has no influence on the behavior. Second, G is an homogeneous function. And because of that, I can prove the existence of this elastoplastic tensor. In some books now, today, in some books, the existence of the elastoplastic tensor is presented as an assumption. Not at all. Not at all. Half a century ago, the father of plasticity have shown that. Of course, this demonstration is not mine. Another question. Let's go to the phenomena. Okay, here this is the Undren triaxial test. Everybody know triaxial experiment. Huh? You have a cylindrical sample. You apply a given axial strain rate, and you have constant total lateral stresses. Your granular sample, your soil sample, is full of water, saturated by water, and you close the drainage. If you close the drainage because the sample is full of water, of course the grains are incompressible, water is incompressible. It means that this is a compression, an isochoric compression, a compression at constant volume. Isochoric, undrained means isochoric. And now, if we, you don't know the plastic limit condition for granular material, which is called Mohr-Coulomb. let us come back to Leonardo da Vinci basic equation, T equal to Fn. This dry friction relation has been generalized in continuum mechanics by just considering this expression, where tau is a tangential component of the stress vector and sigma n is the normal component to the stress vector. The phi is called the friction angle of the soil, and if the grains of the soil are glued together, you add here a cohesion. C is called cohesion, and phi is called friction angle. And this plastic limit condition is called Mohr-Coulomb plastic limit condition. In the I will discuss only this stress plane here. Q, sigma 1 minus sigma 3, axial stress minus lateral stress, as a function of the mean pressure, sigma 1 plus 2 sigma 3 divided by 3. Mean pressure here, what is called deviatoric stress here. And the Mohr-Coulomb line in this QP prime plane, this Mohr-Coulomb limit condition is a line passing through the origin because it's a sand without cohesion. For a sand, the cohesion is equal to 0. For a clay, you have some cohesion. For a concrete, you have some cohesion. For a bituminous material, you have some cohesion. But for a dry sand, not at all any cohesion. If so, the Mohr-Coulomb line is like that, and the triaxial compression gives you this kind of paths here. And these results are very known in soil mechanics. And you see that you have this peak value here, largely before the Mohr-Coulomb line. And if I have the triaxial test can be axially strain controlled. It means that you apply a given axial strain rate. But it can be also axially force control. You can apply a force. If so, because F is equal to sigma 1 minus sigma 3 divided by the section of the sample, the area of the section of the sample, if you are force control at Q peak here, you will obtain a failure because you cannot add an additional force. It means that here you have a true failure. The material cannot support any additional force. Of course, before the peak, if you are axially strain controlled or axially force controlled, the results are more or less identical. But if you are strain controlled, axially strain control, you can pass the peak. If you are stress control at Q peak, you cannot continue to increase the axial force, and you will have here a proper failure. It means large strains, burst of kinetic energy, and so on. And this failure state here is largely before Mohr-Coulomb plastic limit condition. It means that the determinant of M here is strictly positive, according to elastoplastic relation. You have a failure here which is not on the Mohr-Coulomb line where the determinant of M is vanishing along this line. You are here strictly inside the Mohr-Coulomb surface. Okay, another example which is quite classical in soil mechanics, and that will be my only other example, is what is called the Q constant drain test. The Q constant drain test is a test like that. You have your triaxial compression, and for certain value of Q, you maintain Q constant. If you maintain Q constant, you have, of course, dq equal to 0. It means that you have d sigma 1 equal to d sigma 3, and because of the axisymmetric condition, d sigma 3 is also equal to d sigma 2. It means that Q constant drain test is an isotropic unloading from anisotropic stress states, because here you have negative value. Okay. And what is interesting is to consider the volume variation along these paths. Here you have a loose sand. It means that you have a first contractant behavior for the initial triaxial compression. Then during the isotropic unloading, during the Q constant drain test, you have this dilatant behavior with a minimum value here, an extremum value of the volume variation. And at this minimum value of the volume variation, experimentalists have observed since many years very strange failure, because once more this failure was not fulfilling any plastic limit condition. I will consider the second order work just after that. Here, this is other example with this. What is important is this minimum value of the volume variation here as a function of the lateral stress or of the axial strain here. Huh? Okay, now I will introduce later on the second order work, but just to explain these results. Okay, I will consider now the second order work, just to explain these results. I will not consider Lyapunov definition and so on. The second order work has been introduced half a century ago by people like Rodney Hill, who is the father of plasticity, but also Giulio Maier in Italy, for example, has worked a lot on, if I can say, on the second order work criterion. Jean Mandel in France, Mrouz in Poland, Bazin, Snake Bazin in United States. But the second order work criterion was not applied in geomechanics. It has been applied a lot in mechanical engineering, in metal plasticity, but not in geomechanics. And my idea in 1987 was to propose an explanation, a rational explanation of these failures before Moore-Coulomb plastic limit surface by considering second order work. But of course I will come back on second order work criterion. Anyway, the second order work is just the scalar product of d sigma and d epsilon. It means that for a triaxial test with axisymmetric condition and with coinciding principal axis for d sigma and d epsilon, the expression of second order work is very simple and is given here. And if in this expression I enter the Undren condition, not any volume variation, isochoric condition, as I told you a little bit before, d epsilon v equal to 0, the second order work is just equal to dq d epsilon 1. It means that according to Hill's sufficient condition of stability, the peak of Q for Undren condition is unstable. It means that this second order work criterion is able to explain, and we will see why, is able to explain these failures which are not verifying any plastic limit condition. But what is interesting is the fact that for axisymmetric condition, I can write any elastoplastic relation like that. Not d sigma 1, d sigma 3 as a function of d epsilon 1, d epsilon 3, but I can write also the elastoplastic relation like that, because Q epsilon 1 and epsilon v, the volume variation sigma 3, are conjugate variables with respect to the energy. It's very simple to verify that Q epsilon 1 plus sigma 3 epsilon v is identical to sigma 1 epsilon 1 plus 2 sigma 3 epsilon 3, with Q sigma 1 minus sigma 3 and epsilon v epsilon 1 plus 2 epsilon 3. It's very easy. You see that sigma 3 epsilon 1 will vanish with minus sigma 3 epsilon 1 here, and you have a sigma 1 epsilon 1 plus 2 sigma 3 epsilon 3. Okay. It means that you can write the elastoplastic relation like that. And now, if I take into account the undrained condition, isochoric condition, the epsilon v is always equal to 0. And if Q is passing through a peak, and we have seen, according to the experiments, that Q is passing through a peak, dq will vanish at Q peak, and at Q peak, this column here is identical, is equal to 0, and I have 0 equal to n d epsilon 1 d sigma 3. It means that I have necessarily, if I want to describe Q peak in undrained condition, necessarily I will have vanishing value for the determinant of n, which is not a plastic limit condition, because for this point, for this stress strain state, the determinant of the proper elastoplastic matrix is strictly positive, and we will see later how it is possible. That's the reason why I have called this condition a bifurcation criterion. And you have here not a flow rule, because you see that it's a mixed relation. I have called this relation a failure rule. The failure rule gives you the failure mechanism. You see that you have here a generalization of the notion of plastic limit condition, and you have here a generalization of the notion of failure rule, and we will see with the Q constant drain test that we will have also a generalization of the notion of limit states. Okay, I will not enter in too many technical details, but on this expression, dq d epsilon v as a function of d epsilon 1 d sigma 3, and if I want to come back to the Q constant drain test, you see that for Q constant drain test, dq is always equal to 0, Q is constant, and we have seen, according to the experiment, that epsilon v is passing through a maximum. It means that at this maximum, the epsilon v is equal to 0. It means that you have here a strange, more or less a strange results, because the experimentalists in soil mechanics have never seen that, which is the fact that the maximum value of Q for undrained test and the maximum value of the volume variation for Q constant drain test, according to the previous basic theory, correspond to the same bifurcation criterion, which is the vanishing value of the same matrix. It means that all these stress points should be aligned, and you see that it is more or less verified here in the Q P prime plane. The stress points corresponding to the Q peaks for undrained test, and the stress points which correspond to the maximum of the volume variation for Q constant drain test correspond indeed to the same bifurcation criterion. It means the same line in this QP prime plane. We will see later on that the bifurcation domain respects the conical structure of Mohr-Coulomb condition. It means that the bifurcation given bifurcation criterion correspond to a given line, and it is not so badly verified by the experiments. Another point, we will see that later on, is the fact that if the bifurcation criterion is the same, it is possible to show from a theoretical point of view that the direction of the stress vector at failure is the same. It means that the direction of the stress vector in sigma 1 square root of 2 sigma 3 plane, this is the Rendulic plane, taking into account the axisymmetric condition, the stress vectors have must be parallel, must have the same directions, which is not so badly verified. Okay. Okay, I am finished with this brief discussion about experimental results, and I will now arrive to the second order work criterion. Huh?
Maybe we do this tomorrow. Is 15 to 5.
Okay, let's continue tomorrow morning. Is that okay for you? Not too fast, not too slow.
Yeah, I will tell you that maybe this last was also for me fast, but we will.
Yeah, the discussion about the experimental results is not so important because these experimental results are directly coming from soil mechanics. Now we will stay in a more in the more general framework of elastoplasticity. Yeah? These experimental results are not so important. Just have in mind that according to the experiments, some failures appear clearly before more Coulomb condition. Another very known example in practice is the question of landslide. If we apply roughly elastoplastic theory to the question of landslide, a slope is stable for an angle of the slope equal to the friction angle of the material. It means that on a sand, with the sand, the slope will be stable for an angle of 30 degrees. And when you are on the beach, it's approximately verified. The dunes have an angle around 27, 28, 25 degrees. But now you have in practice some landslide of 14 degrees, and even in Italy, I will show you an example at the end of the lecture. I will show you an example of a landslide in Petacciato in Italy with a slope angle of 6 degrees. This landslide has been analyzed inside in the framework of an European contract called LESLOS, and indeed any method, empirical method or numerical method to explain this landslide was not able to find a mechanism able to explain this landslide with a slope angle of 6 degrees. It means that you have seen in the lab some failures are not explained, but in nature also some failures are not explained by the classical plastic failure theory.